Hello, everyone, and welcome back to DeucesCracked.com. This is Andrew BalugaWhale Sideman back with another episode of Ghost, playing some small stakes again on PartyPoker.com. Again, it's been a little while since I've been on Party, and I've kind of thrown myself here on some of these waiting lists and whatnot, but trying to get myself off of maybe this full ring table on the right, but be playing some 50 cent $1, talking again about kind of how to pick our spots, what sort of the keys of game dynamics look like, how to deal with the occasional aggressive player that makes things maybe a little bit more challenging for us. And again, sort of along the same theme a little bit as last time, thinking about what are the macro trends that might influence our choices when we're still kind of gathering information. So, again, we'll sort of start the way we do normally, which is to go around and identify players. It looks like we have definitely this Dan Bilzerian player seems like he might be not really strong. Although interestingly enough, he's on my sort of third side table. In fact, let me swap this table in and out for this one. So he's on multiple tables, and go. And so he might be a regular somehow. It'd be kind of unclear. He's probably just like a two-tabling random fish, but who knows? His stack size is kind of strange. He's not really. It's not really a good size to be a short stacker. Most short stackers would leave after, getting up to $69, for example. But also most regulars would be inclined to. Most regulars would be inclined to buy in for full if they were going to let themselves get that high up. So anyway, um, it's kind of more likely than not that he's kind of a fish. One interesting person is this Ashy Poker 87. The reason why Ashy Poker 87 is interesting is because his stack is enormous. So you see him out here, he has a 400 big blind stack. So that means basically much more likely than not, he has some gamble in him. It's really hard to be a passive player, even like a tight aggressive player, and run up a 400 big blind stack unless you're playing for a really long time. So, well, granted, it is definitely possible that he's just been playing for a really long time, and so as a result, he's got, he's run okay. Who knows if he's even run okay, but he's just been there for a long time to get that kind of a stack. But my guess is, more likely than not, he's going to be somebody who's really aggressive. I don't see him on any of my other three tables, or my other two tables, rather. So we'll kind of keep our eye on him, but that's usually a good starting place when looking for potentially aggressive or even bad aggressive players, is who's got the enormous stack, the unwieldy large stack. Now, on the right table here, it looks like we have three potential fish. We have Dan Bilzerian, looks like he might be leaving. We have this John Rambo 22, who again too deep to be a short stack, and the Sten 168, potentially a short stacker, but it generally we would guess seems to be kind of just like a random fish. Bilzerian leaves, but he stays on the other table, interestingly enough, which is kind of interesting in that he's maybe he's just playing this last hand. The leaving after it gets a certain amount would be, sort of stereotypical of a short stacker, but my guess is he's just wrapping up for the day, which is too bad because who doesn't want to play pots against a guy named Dan Bilzerian? This is one of those spots that's probably, when he makes it 2.5x, is probably okay to defend offsuit connectors, but it's definitely pretty borderline. You're not going to get like a ton of value from this, but in terms of like playing as unexploitably as possible, it's probably correct to defend really, really wide in position there. Again, position is valuable. Your opponent's range is probably really wide. I'm going to go ahead and complete this, the Jack 9 off. Probably not good enough to actually fire out like a ISO bet or something like that pre-flop. From the big blind, it might be good enough. But anyway, we were talking about something interesting a second ago. Oh, defending with a 6-5 off from the blind there. Once it checks through, I think we can probably fire out a bet as just a semi-bluff here with our Jack of clubs. We know we're going to get called by anyone who has a pair or a high club, but it's sort of, given that it checked through on the flop, not all that likely that somebody does. Somebody raises here. Now, on the one hand, you might say, oh, well, we have some odds, but we're actually probably not likely to get paid off if we do hit our club. And our club might just not be best off very often, whereas someone might even have flop to flush, or have a full house already, or some of our outs might give them full houses. So I think it's just a spot where we can fold, especially against somebody with such a small stack, where it's pretty unlikely that they have, they're probably passive and pretty unlikely they have anything other than a really strong hand there. Anyways, um, I've got a four-handed table going on the side here. I don't reckon. I mean, this. Let's see. I feel like I've seen. So this Nectem guy from Canada he's on multiple tables, so he's probably a regular of some kind. And some of these other guys, it's kind of difficult to say. At high stakes, you might be very confident that somebody whose name is like Lone Star 77, who's also sitting with a full stack and seems to be doing normal things, or this guy right here, or are likely to be regulars. But at small stakes, it's really a lot harder to just know offhand when you first sit down. Now, this one guy, this Becca Baxi guy, rebought auto rebought, so we can be pretty confident that he's a regular. That's one thing. I mean, stack size is just such a big giveaway. Um, I'm gonna bet about half pot here. I think that like my opponent is pretty likely to play fit or fold in general. I don't really. This isn't a board where I like really need to like let's say juice the pot because there's not too many things that I'm gonna actually get my opponent off of on the turn that I could have gotten him off of on the or that like the bet size is gonna help me. I'm still gonna barrel this because it's in sort of the my nut range for draws in terms of barreling. But I expect my opponent to just have a queen like a fairly high amount of the time. Now the nice thing is I don't expect them to fold a queen if the river card's an 8, for example, at all. But I would basically bet that my opponent has a queen or a 10 here very often and is unlikely to fold them. So yeah, I mean it's probably fine by him all around. Again, it's kind of hard for us to know whether or not this person is like a regular or a giant fish. And if they're a giant fish, there's just no way they're folding that. You could definitely make some arguments that the turn barrel, we don't have enough fold equity to make that a turn barrel profitable, but I would imagine we probably do. He probably has some pairs lower than a 10 that he might fold. And we also have to assume that against a random unknown, at some portion of the time our opponent folds a 10. But yeah, I don't even think it really matters which 10 it is. Now, on the other side of this coin, which a lot of people miss, is they say, obviously you shouldn't be bluffing in a spot like that. But beyond that, you could say, well, what if we have a hand like King 10 there? We're really tempted to slow down, or the hand like Pocket Jacks, we're really tempted to slow down. It looks like there's pretty clear value there across a pretty wide range of hands, and not to mention like just in general because he likes to call, but because he's defending so wide in the big blind. Against our open. We might want to make our open a little bit bigger and put him in less of an easy spot in terms of which hands he can actually feel comfortable calling from the big blind. Sometimes when someone kind of gets in the habit of calling your min raises with any two cards, for example, or like any two suited kind of situation, they kind of will just stick with that even when you start making it 2.5 or 2.7 or something like that. So I think it's probably we'll probably experiment with that against this LMS Joe guy going forward. This King 8 suited is a spot where if we had some fish over here that we felt comfortable playing against in the blinds, we probably would open it, but in mid position probably not quite good enough. Now one thing is interesting here. We've now seen that Ashy Poker has sat down over there, and also Ashy Poker really hasn't done anything too bad aggressive. Usually bad aggressive guys tend to give themselves away very quickly. So one would imagine at this point that he's probably just a regular who's been playing for a long time, and maybe he's got some gamble. I mean, as soon as I say this, he 3-bets. Probably needs to have a little bit of gamble. He can't be like a giant nit, or it's hard for him to be a giant nit and get that big of a stack. But most likely he's just like kind of a random medium laggy reg would be our guess. And we'll just keep folding these garbagey cards until we get something that we like more. Again, I don't read too much. We talked about this last time in terms of bet sizing. I don't read too much into like my opponents knowing that I have a good hand when I make it 3x instead of 2.5. Primarily because they should know I have a pretty good hand because I'm raising under the gun. This is actually really interesting. I think that in obviously like in high stakes kind of thing, we're getting ready to go with our hand. We have seen this guy playing what you might call like kind of a reggish strategy. Now, normally calling 3-bets out of position seems like it would be bad. Our hand is very premium though. This is probably like one of only a couple of hands I think you could get away with calling out of position here. On the right table, we're just going to run essentially a semi-bluff. We have a lot of good turn cards that we can keep barreling. I might even want to make that bigger. That's not an awesome card for us to keep betting. It's pretty good though. We also have all the fours in our range. Obviously, this board is really strong for our opponent. This is kind of an interesting spot. We chop with any aces. It's going to be kind of hard to get him off of. It shouldn't be that hard to get him off. We should have all the good cards here. We'll try one more time. I don't think he has a king very often. Yeah, he calls for the chop. That seems poor. Anyway. Yeah, on this particular board, our opponents, like, we're kind of in the low end of our range for what we're calling out of position there. Our range of hands for calling out of position is probably something along the lines of, like, jacks, tens, ace, queen, something like that. Again, the only reason why I decided to call out of position instead of just straight folding is because this guy had already shown that he had, a little bit of, he was playing something like a little bit gamblier by calling down like he did before. This is almost certainly a 3-bet here with Queen 10 suited. Just is a great hand to include in your bluffing range. And now we can be pretty confident that we're ahead. Definitely think that we're likely to get called by a lot of worse pocket pairs that are basically hoping we have random ace king. That's pretty much close to the not bad card in the deck for us. Not only can we not really get value, our opponent just has an ace a lot of the time that he's calling with on the flop. So all those things that we thought we could get value from before, pocket nines, 8, 7, 6s, stuff like that. Now this should be a spot where if we checked again, which we will, that our opponent should be turning a lot of those things into bluffs. But I don't think that he's likely to, and so we'll just kind of check it down and hope for the best. I'm kind of expecting him to have like a hand like 10-9 suited or something like that. Did he have Queen 10 off there? That would be interesting to know. He showed down, he showed down Queen 10 of hearts. So, pretty much standard all around, I think. But honestly, with Queen 10 of hearts there, he should just definitely be turning his hand to a bluff. I wonder if we should be turning our hand into a bluff. That's interesting to look at. Think about ranges for a second. So let's bring that hand back up. Fold these things. Replay. Let's bring the replay on over. So we bet. So on the turn, like, anyone can have an ace. I can have an ace and check it. He can have an ace and check it. He probably would be likely to bet an ace, but maybe not if it's a super strong ace. Maybe if it's something that's like a little bit less than awesome, he might just check it back. So I can have king queen, and we can both have ace jack. He's just generally going to have, he can't really have, I guess he could potentially have king queen that floats and checks back on the turn. That's definitely possible. Interesting. It's just a line that, like, I just feel like people don't very often end up having the bluff, or like folding stuff rather to that line because it looks so like bluffy that you just check the turn. But honestly, in retrospect, I think probably we could maybe even get our opponent off of some hands like. I just think that the only hands we can try to get him off of actually really are things like what he actually had, like Queen 10 or 10-9 suited. But even 10-9 suited we're beating. So really Queen 10, King 10, we can get him off those. We may be able to get him off of a random ace, but the problem is there's just not that many random aces. He has to have like ace X because he's probably not folding ace queen. He's probably betting ace queen himself on the turns. He probably doesn't even have ace queen. But more likely than not, he's got like ace jack if he has an ace, which is just obviously bad news bears for us. So I think, while I like the idea of going for like our range being stronger than his and us having more combinations of nut hands than he does, we can't really have king. No one can really have king queen. In fact, if anything, he is more likely to have king queen. Granted, we have a blocker to it, but like just range to range, he's more likely to have it and check back than I am to check it on the turn. Unless I'm going for a check raise with like only probably king queen of clubs would be a hand I would do that with. It seems like just range wise, we probably play it correctly there to just check. I'd be curious to see what the Poker Snowy has to say about that situation though. Against somebody who's probably not opening wide enough, uh, probably still not going to defend jack 8 suited against the 2.2 there. You obviously against somebody who's opening super wide, that would be kind of a no-brainer defend. But against somebody who's not opening all that wide, it's probably again, we don't really know how wide somebody's opening, but it's probably still not quite good enough. Obviously, the more someone opens, the more that becomes just a fine place to call and defend. I don't usually like 3-betting ace queen here against an early position raise. Although I do think this is like a pretty decent spot to. Yeah, it's probably an okay spot to go for. This guy did seem to have some gamble in him. I think we can probably fire away here. Our opponent just sort of doesn't have that many straights. He has some straights. So the question on the left is whether or not we want to go for a check raise or whether or not we want to just flat. His bet size makes me think that he probably doesn't have anything that great, but he's also people like tend to. I don't know. I think it's probably check raise. We only lose to at this point like a very small number of hands. One set of queens. We block aces. And I think we can probably get called by worst queens for sure. I don't think he really has worst queens that often with that bet size. Like I don't think he has like if he has king queen, I think he probably bets like a little bit bigger. But I think he might call it with a hand like jacks, 10, something like that. We also like have been bluffing a little bit and getting caught a little bit here and there. So there's a good chance that he might just put us on kind of a weaker range. You could say to yourself, is this a place where someone's likely to barrel a lot? Maybe, and you could think about this in a few ways. Like it's possible that your opponents tend to really undervalue the strength of the small blind flat against. I'm gonna flat this here. It's pretty much squeeze protected. So if somebody squeezes, I'm kind of in okay shape, and I don't really mind if Dan Bilzerian comes along and plays. And he's just generally gonna play fine in a lot of cases. Anyway, you could make the argument that if your opponent really underestimates how strong your small blind flat is, they might barrel off too much. But again, I'm still kind of operating under the base assumption that our opponents basically are going to be calling too much and not bluffing enough, which is kind of the default for relatively passive small stakes games. Now we never know for sure, but that's probably what it is. Now this is interesting because Joe almost certainly has a queen here or a 9. We don't really think he's that likely to fold it. He never really has a draw. He always check raises a draw, and he probably always check raises the nuts. So I think we probably fire off again, and we can sort of take advantage of a lot of river cards, either trying to get like pump in good value against a queen if we hit something, but then also there's probably some river cards that complete other things, like if a 8 peels off or something like that. That's a card where he can't really have Jack 10 because he's basically always check raising Jack 10 on the flop, one would assume, given his sort of general aggressiveness and lack of foldiness. I'm going to keep opening this ace 3. This is sort of definitely a questionable open, unless you think you have a pretty good skill advantage over the blinds. I think I do, so I'm just going to do it. But anyway, what I was going to say is that's a spot where if your opponent kind of is restricted in what types of cards he hates to see, you can really actually own a lot more of the deck there than you think. So on the one hand, you think obviously I own any jacks, kings, and diamonds. I own those, which is a big chunk already. You would really also say like, well, I own 8s. I own a fair amount of things here. So this is actually pretty interesting. He makes it quite small in his 3-bet. This is only 6 big blinds. So we're actually getting a pretty good price with our hand, assuming that Dan Bilzerian comes along, which we assume he never really folds. Now there is some chance that Dan Bilzerian is slow playing something strong, but it's probably very, very minimal. He's just very, very likely to come along with whatever it is that he just call with whatever it is that he had, and give us kind of the odds we need to try to make something. Now, the bet sizing preflop is kind of interesting. Like, you don't really see people take that type of bet sizing too often with a hand like Ace King. I mean, again, certainly possible. I'm not clairvoyant, able to say like, oh, he never ever has Ace King there. But I don't think it's super likely to be. I was gonna say, I'm really expecting him to check back a lot. With a hand like probably kings, queens, something like that. Obviously, we think we have the best hand here with top pair, and so we can try to get value against something like the Amblesarian, but also more or less more likely than not getting value against a hand like LMS Joe with a hand like kings or queens. But he actually probably makes a good fold there if he has something like kings or queens, because we're probably not super likely to bluff out into LMS Joe. So we take a 4-bet over here with tens. We sort of need to get 11.5 to 1 in order to call for a set mine, but we also might win sometimes. I don't think that someone's aggressive enough to just ship it in here with no reads. So it's either a fold. It's probably a fold. It's pretty close to a call because we need that 11.5 to 1. And again, this is like for small stakes. In high stakes, there's basically no chance I'm ever folding a. I'm never ever folding pocket tens in a blind button versus blind situation. It's just not happening. And then this is a good spot. Just give an image to just go for value and just assume that our opponent is going to be, think that we're raging a little bit. This is interesting because he chooses this kind of small 4-bet size, which is generally really good to do when you're in position. But probably out of position. I guess it's not that small, but we probably have odds to call here with ace-queen suited in position. Again, granted, there's sort of only a few hands we'd ever want to call there. We probably would also definitely call aces, which helps keeps us a little bit balanced. I might even be inclined to call kings there, but obviously this is a pretty bad flop for us in general, so... Interesting that he gets aggro on this board, though. But I guess he might think that we're pretty limited to like mid-pocket pairs kind of thing, like tens and jacks and stuff like that. Anyways. And it's definitely possible, I'll be the first to admit, it's definitely possible that I'm playing much too tight and folding much too often against aggression at 50 cent 1. Again, I haven't played 50 cent 1 on Party in ever, basically, other than for making videos a long time ago. And so difficult for me to say with any degree of confidence. This might be a little bit too thin of a 3-bet, but I kind of like it. I think he's probably opening pretty wide with Dan Bilzerian in there. I was going to say, it's difficult for me to say exactly what the game dynamic really looks like because it's been kind of a little while since I was playing around here. And when I look at my students playing at the ones that I have at this stakes, it generally seems roughly the same, a little bit more aggressive than it has over the last years, but nothing like groundbreaking. So I think probably the ranges aren't so wide that we should feel great about 3-betting tens and getting them in, that we should feel great about like making big hero moves with ace-queen suited. The call pre-flop is probably relatively close with a suited hand. This is a spot where normally we would squeeze. But because of the depth, we're probably just pricing the flat here. Again, I'm pretty confident that given these stack sizes and the player types, a set is just super valuable. I would be not very inclined to flat given these stack sizes against players who are good, but again, that's kind of a contradiction because players who are good are probably unlikely to have these stack sizes. And we'll just sort of get out of the way in those spots. This 10-7 is probably an open, and this ace-9 is almost certainly an ISO against this like 40 big blind limper in the cutoff. This guy and Nektam has been been pretty aggressive. He cold 4-bet us a minute ago. He's been kind of hanging out, giving us some grief. This is a spot where like our opponent is actually I think pretty likely to have some kind of non-queen hand, like a pair of 6s or 4s. I think we can probably get our opponent off of that a lot. If he does indeed have I'll 3-bet this for value. If he does indeed have a queen, I think that he's never going to fold it, obviously. But that other thing is sort of what happens sometimes there, which is that your opponent just has a random draw, and you just win anyway. So it'd be interesting to see what he had. He just had 3-5 for what was probably a straight draw. I don't even remember what the board was exactly. This is a fine spot to check back. I'm not really worried about too many turn cards ruining my equity because, again, I have the Ace of Clubs, and I don't think I'm going to get him to fold any better hands. You might be able to justify getting value from hands like King 10, Queen 10, 10 9, Pocket 9s, Pocket 8s, but more likely than not, I'm going to get more value by getting. I'm probably only going to get 2 streets against those hands anyway, and the board is not likely to change too much to negatively influence me. I think I'm just going to end up calling down here. The bet sizing doesn't make me think he's likely to have a flush. He may, but more likely than not, he either has just a missed straight draw or a 10 or a jack. And if he has that, I lose. But I'm getting almost 4 to 1, so I'm probably getting the right price. Again, river decisions can be pretty easy when you think about them in terms of just the pot odds. So if there's $40 in the pot and he bets $10, I need to call $10 to win 40. I mean, if you count his $10 in there. So in this case, there was $30 in the pot, and he bet 10, so I called 10 to win 40 total. I only need to be good 25% of the time to be make that call good. So he doesn't need to be bluffing very often or have like a worse value hand very often. Now, sometimes in those situations, like someone needs to have a bluff 25% of the time and they just never do. In those cases, it's also easy to look at it objectively and say, I need my opponent to be bluffing here where this river check raise shove 25% of the time. And you might be like, yeah, well, that's just never, ever, ever happening. This is an interesting spot. This is probably a squeeze. It's certainly not a flat with this guy in the blinds there, but it's probably good enough to go for a squeeze here, I think. Given the depth, I kind of expect Newell Star to flat me a fair amount. Shots fired is going to have a wide range a lot. Now, he may play back, but again, this is a pretty strong line in general. But I expect to be kind of, in general, having a range advantage against Newell Star. And this is a good board for me to bet somewhat large and convincingly like I have an ace. I probably should have bet even a little bit larger. That's like an interesting card. On the one hand, my opponent is pretty likely to, if my opponent has like hearts, he would definitely play it this way and have a flush so far. Obviously, I have the 3 of hearts. I have a lot of outs still. I don't know if my opponent is ever likely to fold an ace here. Probably not. But he may fold other things like pocket 10s or king queen that was trying to float or something along those lines. And again, it's just one of those classic examples of pot equity plus fold equity equals bet. If I bet there and I get called by ace queen, that's actually like not the worst scenario of all time, just given how many outs I actually have. So if I hadn't just been smashing on this guy, I would 3-bet this. Actually, now that I think about it, I kind of do want to 3-bet it. Just because I've been smashing on a guy, like he may be fed up with me, that's true, but this is also one of those things that your opponent may not know whether or not you're likely to be bluffing here or likely not to be bluffing here. And again, ace 8 off is sort of in that wheelhouse of one of the best hands that I would fold. So we probably have to at least consider 3-betting it. And I think it's probably a worthwhile plus EV bet to do so. And now he's like, I would rather not sit on Andrew's right if I can avoid it. We get a min raise by this kind of passive guy. I think this is probably a spot for us to 3-bet small for value. One of the things about giving good odds to your opponent is that it's not so bad to give good odds to your opponent if they don't have much money, because their sort of implied odds are minimal. So this guy bets 2. No, I was checking to Scorpion Man to ideally let him fire out something, like just ship it in there. Now this guy kind of ruined that plan. I'm going to go ahead and put in a check raise to 10. Again, just trying to get value from this guy. I think that he probably has like a pair or a draw almost all the time, which he's pretty likely to just fold. We probably have a range advantage over here on the right. Our opponent probably just has like a lot of random pocket pairs and not all that many kings. Unlikely to have 7s for sure. Very unlikely to have 7s. We have all the 7s in the deck. We'll go ahead and bet this for value here. I'm going to give up here. I think that this is one of the spots where we tend to underestimate how strong our opponent's ranges actually are. And even though he doesn't have any 7s, we have a lot of stuff that aren't 7s. Now, granted, we actually don't have very many bluffs on this board at all. So probably this is a hand that in theory, if I was trying to balance, I probably should bluff with this hand. But the problem with that is that I don't think that my opponent is likely to try to be balanced also by like folding some, having some range that calls flop and folds turn. So in truth, I'm just taking an exploitative decision there to not barrel it. But it's actually like if you were playing against a really good opposition, it seems like it might be a good idea. Again, I'm going to go for a squeeze here with eights. This might be a spot where I might chip it in on Newell Star just because I've been so aggressive. But I guess he's no longer on that table, so we'll just keep on grinding our 3-bet game. And we'll probably play for another 15 minutes or so. I think I'm going to swap out this. Well, I guess this is kind of interesting. We got 3-handed, really 4-handed, but this guy's has no chips. And he's still folding. Yay. It'll definitely be, well, I guess the other person left. So we'll swap this person out in just a second here. We'll raise it to 3.5, just essentially trying to get a call. Our opponent's going to have essentially, a pot size bet or less left in their stack after this. Obviously, we're just going to check to him here. Our hand is pretty close to bulletproof. I assume our opponent just ships it in a huge portion of the time here with random cards. Probably pretty risk averse, but that's too bad for him. And we'll check ship it at that point once he's put in his 380. And we'll assume that we are good vast majority of the time. I'm going to hot swap that in and out. And we will, we will tile our tables here. So the right table has now become the left table, but you guys are smart, and I'm sure we'll be able to follow along. Again, kind of along the same themes as last time, we're really emphasizing thinking about range advantages. Where can we bluff? I.e., when our range is generally really strong, we want to be able to bluff. When our range is really weak, we want to be value betting. So how can we kind of control that and sort of perceiving, okay, this is a spot where even though I have a bad hand, my range is really strong, so I can fire away. More likely than not in these stakes, it's going to be a lot more like, does my opponent have the hand that he obviously has? And if so, do I actually want to try to make him fold it or not, regardless of what my range is telling him? Because you might be an awesome storyteller and your range might be totally crushing his, and he just might not care, which sort of makes for problems. We've been 3-betting a lot. I think there's kind of a danger of getting cold forward here, but again, that might be just like high stakes Andrew being afraid of really good players cold foring. Instead, I think probably we just raise and call it our thing. This is a spot where we probably can bet. I think we bet a little bit larger here. We can get our opponent to fold like a fair amount of those low pairs that we would like them to fold. And again, our opponent's going to play like pretty statically with hands like Jack 10. Obviously, with a queen, we're not likely to get our opponent off. If our opponent's going to make a lot of top pairs in 3-bet pots, then what are we going to do? I expect my opponent to check back here with Jack 10 like always. But now my opponent, one of the issues that my opponent does have, the King Jacks of the world, he certainly has those in his range. We'll probably fold the wrong hand here, or the best hand here, if he has Ace Jack. But even Ace Jack is drawing relatively live. I don't really expect my opponent to have too many bluffs here, if any. So we can probably just fold it. It is one of the best hands that we would fold, so you might be able to make an argument for like using that as a bluffing situation. But again, my opponent, when he bets that sizing too, is very polarized and pretty likely to just have a really good hand. We'll just go ahead and fold. We'll fold both these hands. The King 9 could definitely be an open here, but these guys have been kind of splashing, so maybe not. Certainly be an open if we were on the button against Haran. Anyways. It's interesting because, we're trying to think of what hands can we have there where we check the turn, where we aren't folding. So my sort of go-to hands for checking the turn where I'm not folding would be really nut hands, so sets and straights. I think are probably better to check the turn than to try. I probably can defend this against a min open. Again, deuces are really bad, but I guess they're okay. We can probably get value against some kings and worse deuces here. I'm also going to fold some equity sometimes, so it's probably worth a bet. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller against Haran because he's sort of taken to the limp shove thing against me. That's what we did the last time. And so Haran appears to be bad aggressive, so we're going to stop doing that. We're going to start limping behind against this guy and just folding stuff like 8-3. If we're in the big blind, that's a no-brainer defend, but a small blind is a fair amount worse than the big blind. Again, that's one of those things that we have to kind of wrap our heads around is all blinds are not created equal, and just defending something from the blind is really different, especially if you have somebody who is aggressive in the big blind position. This is a spot where we'll definitely 3-bet for value. Again, we expect shots fired to have a really wide range. We're going to definitely have to call it off here. The magic number is 2-1. If you're getting 2-1, you kind of have to call it off because your just odds are too good, too likely to be ahead. Now, granted, this is sort of not the board we're looking for, but we also just have the best hand. Showdown value is good. I like showdown value. I'm going to pause the tape for a minute while I can see if I can get some more tables. I take that back. This table turned three-handed on the right, and I've got another three-handed table. Or wait, no, it's only a two-handed table. Shoot. Well, we're going to play three-handed and heads up with this guy for a minute while we sort of finish out our video. This seems like a pretty bad board. Like we're kind of range disadvantaged here. So usually when you're in that kind of situation, you probably just want to drop it and not bluff. Like we essentially represent a ton of bluffs there, whereas we only have sort of a relatively we have a fair amount of value hands, but probably not anywhere near enough given what story we're telling. Some people say I'm supposed to defend that the deuce 9 off. I'm not quite there yet. We'll mix up our pre-flop raise size a little bit and see how our opponent reacts. If he's folding a lot to 2.2s, we'll try that for now. That's usually a pretty good steal price. 2.2 is like relatively close to, what you're normally dealing with. Now, and heads up, this is pretty much a no-brainer. Defend our opponent, even though it's small stakes. Our opponent is still pretty likely to have a pretty wide range of hands for 3-betting against our button 2.2. So we probably have to go ahead and defend. That again is a pretty bad board for us. If we had something like 10-9 of spades, you might consider defending, but it's probably not meant to be. And while I was talking, I think that I screwed up and missed the chance to double barrel. But we'll probably try it again now. Not 63. That's too many's. Okay, now I'm going to pause the tape and look for more. Well, this table's still going, so let's see if I can find something else while this table's going. Really nothing. No love. I guess I could move up and play. Wait. Yay, we got a full ring table. For our last 10 minutes, we'll play that. Table options. Table options. Tile tables. Cool. These kind of queen 10 suited hands are like pretty underrated when it comes to queen 10 jack 10 suited are kind of generally underrated hands in general in terms of both bluffing capacity and just how often they win. So beyond the fact that this is a regular clearly raising to try to steal free money from the fish who posted pre-flop, this has become interesting. The fish immediately snapped 4x's. Now it's a decent read that he's likely to be bad aggressive, but not enough yet for us to just get it in there with him. Given the other presence of this guy coming along, we probably have odds to call and just try to make a set. But it's just a little bit too likely that an unknown who 4x's is just a random fish with a good hand, like a random passive player with a good hand, for us to immediately get on the he's bad aggressive bandwagon. But I'll certainly keep an eye on it, and we may find out a few hands later that like, okay, I suck, and I should have just gotten this in, and he is bad aggressive, but it's tough to say. It is enough for me to say though that something like deuce 4 off against a guy who wanted to play heads up for a little while, and who seemed aggressive and this guy who obviously was aggressive that just a second ago, probably not good enough to just fold that. Um, I think we can probably fire in a small c-bet here. A lot of opponents are just going to be playing fit or fold after they defend super wide. I'm going to make a min raise with ace 3. Again, I'm still kind of skeptical of this Scorpion Man guy, and I don't really want to juice the pot pre-flop without, pretty good hands. Looks like my read here is like looking more and more accurate of him being potentially bad aggressive. That's sort of a classic bad aggressive move. It's just the min re-raise pre-flop. So I probably should have gotten it in with the 8s against him in retrospect, but we couldn't have known that at the time. So we just can only do what we can do. This is a hand, though, that we will, and now that we've seen him both min re-raise and 4x pre-flop, is a hand that if all things sort of go according to plan, if this guy puts in a re-raise, something like that, we'll be sort of more than happy to get it in with Scorpion Man, but not as stoked to get it in with Rocket Man. 3-betting our under the gun open. Honestly, at small stakes, this is probably just a fold. One way to think about it, sort of justify why it's just a fold, is this is sort of one of the our range under the gun is relatively wide, but not that wide. And even though tens is very, very good, we don't need to have that many hands to defend because we're not trying to protect that wide of a range against this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and fold it. Again, probably higher stakes. It's going to be a lot harder to get me to fold something that's that sort of absolute strength strong. And I certainly would never fold it against somebody who was, who appeared to be bad aggressive. But Rocket Man just seems to be like an aggressive guy. And the other thing to remember is that if somebody's going to be 3-betting you a lot when you're opening under the gun, that's kind of I'm definitely going to raise this for really its value against Scorpion Man, who 4x'd before with what was probably a good hand, and is just likely to call and or just play badly with a lot of kind of weak hands. So I think this is a spot where I'm just going to check to him and let him bet stuff, because I think he's really relatively likely to just bet like bad hands here. Now he could have a king and I lose, but I'm just definitely not planning on folding to him, given the information we have so far. Again, not a great card for us, but one would expect that we are still probably ahead often enough to just call down against somebody. And he makes 3-5s, which is, squirrels find nuts. But I mean, it makes our 3-bet pre-flop look pretty great. If he's calling with 6-5 suited, it makes our... Okay, well, we'll snap call with aces. Oh, that's a bad flop for us with aces. We probably made it, though. Yay. This is a spot where with this guy in the blinds, we probably want to 3-bet our deuces. We could certainly consider folding them as well, but I mean, it's sort of one of the best hands we would consider folding. Not to mention, it's very deceptive to make sets in 3-bet pots, especially low sets in 3-bet pots. It's probably just fine to go ahead and 3-bet there. Some of you guys might be thinking like, oh, Andrew, you're so crazy for calling down with the 7s there. But if your opponent is calling with 6-5 suited, he's almost certainly calling with 6-4 suited. And if he's calling with 6-4 suited, he's just, especially like a guy who has given us indications of likely bad aggressiveness, he's pretty likely to just blast off with worse hands there. It's possible we could read into bet sizings and say, oh, well, his bet sizing on the flop seemed like he was just never bluffing. But bad aggressive players often just have bet sizing like that, and that's just kind of part of it. Anyways, we'll probably play like 1 or 2 more orbits and then we'll call it good. That would be my thought. That's kind of the thing about playing against bad aggressive. I'm winning all these achievements. Rockets. Winning rockets. Speedster. Winning fishhooks? What are fishhooks? Is fishhooks the name of a type of hand? Are like 3s or something? Jacks. that makes more sense than 3s. Oh, I'm a fish. I'm a giant fish. Cool. Well, I kind of want to see one more orbit, so I guess we'll just stick around for that, huh? It's not time for the Bachelorette yet, so I guess we'll just see that. Anyways, I think kind of the point of this, I guess, this session and some of the last session is not to get carried away with absolute hand strength against players who are pretty likely to be not hyper aggressive against you, or just not to have ranges wide enough. I would not normally open this, but Lord of War had appeared limped last time under the gun, which makes me think he might just be a giant fish with a full stack, which would be still pretty good to play Queen Jack against. Now, if I'm getting 3-bet by these guys, one thing I was going to get into that I didn't mention before, if you get 3-bet by somebody when you're raising under the gun, there's some element of protection there because your opponents, like the other people at the table, are going to be there a lot. Scorpion Man snap calls, which makes me think that he's just basically like never folding to my turn bet. I do have a lot of equity though. I think we just got fired anyway, even though like our opponent's just never folding. Just call so fast. Maybe I was wrong. You know, timing tells. Timing tells are not my favorite. I often ignore them, like I just did. Two great results. I was gonna say is when someone 3-bets you when you're under the gun, like if I raise here and Rocket Man 3-bets, there's these other players still around that kind of protect you from getting abused. I'm gonna give up with this King Jack against 2 players. Mr. Honey Bunny is just like has a pretty good range there against me. For full rain calling me like that, he's just generally pretty strong. I'm not going to try to raise this Jack 10 into multiple players because this turns into essentially bluffing versus essentially bluffing versus a field that's unlikely to fold. If Rocket Man gets crazy, I'm definitely folding against him because he's like never bluffing there. But Scorpion Man or Lord of War, this is a spot where I'm essentially leading out here for pretty clean value, expecting to get called by lots of random pairs and draws, and more than anything, just to play super well on later streets. And I think I'll go ahead and sit out next big blind, and we'll call it good. So normally this is not a call with Jack 8 suited, but given the presence of Scorpion Man, it just definitely is on the button. Also, the fact that Becca Baxi comes along makes this a little bit better. Multi-way pots tend to benefit the guy in position, and that's us. Not that I think I'm likely to bluff at this, though. 3 players is a lot of players to have an ace. Interesting. So this hand that's going on over here. This hand on the left is not interesting. This hand is interesting though. So basically, what happened here was I'll probably bet that though. No, it's probably still not good enough. I 3-bet against J-Set, who was raising to isolate this Lil Zarab person who raised who this person limped, this fish limped. J-Set raised to 4. I made it 12. Got cold called by the big blind, and then got called by the preflop raiser as well. Now there's a reasonable chance that J-Set has a hand like Ace 4, Ace 5 suited, in which case I lose. But there's also a good chance that he has a hand like random diamonds or something like that. Kind of surprising he didn't bet a pair of queens on the flop. I kind of checked expecting to get to see some bets from worse queens, but now that he's not auto rebuying, we can see that okay, maybe he was actually just kind of a fish in the first place. Again, relatively soft tables all around on the party pokers. Okay, we'll call this one our last hand. Maybe we'll make 3 5s. Oh, I thought we did for a second. Not going to try to bet for value again there, and not really going to try to bet as a bluff on the queen, and definitely just going to fold to aggression. It's kind of weird for someone like that to be aggressive because like the queen should be a scare card. So he either has a very nut hand here or he's bluffing. Problem is, just not that many bluffs, and this is the kind of guy who just limped under the gun a minute ago, so he just probably has a pretty nut hand. So we'll just call it good and get out of the way. Okay, 2 more hands. If we keep getting playable hands, so I can't sign off. That's always a problem. Just love me some playable hands. I probably should have made it a little bit bigger with Lil Zarab in the small blind there. Playable hands. This is a spot where I actually expect I can get called by lots of aces, where my opponent may just be like essentially trying to either make a pair or a straight. Obviously, the straights like are dead. I think he's likely to bluff some of those. He definitely has like ace jack in his range, so that jack is actually not an awesome card for me. He probably three bets ace queen preflop. He also may have some floats with jacks in his range, but I think we probably can call a street there. If he bets again, I find check raising very attractive because obviously it's really hard for him to have a full house. There's only one combination of 4-6 suited left or 4-5 suited left, and I have a 4 blocking it. A little surprising he bets sevens on the turn. I should definitely consider raising there. I don't think that I can get him to fold that, so I think the other way that hand plays out is I just bomb the turn and he calls, and then the river goes check check. I could try check raising, but he does have a fair amount of nut hands still on the turn. Like there are flop straights there, as well as sets and two pairs and things like that. I don't block that well, and I'm not really afraid of him like having equity in general, because if he has a hand like a random ace, he just like is drawing pretty thin because his straight's no good and he's going to lose a lot of money on straight. Anyway, that's going to do it for today. This has been Andrew BalugaWhale Sideman, only here on DeucesCracked.com with some new ghost content. And leave a comment in the thread. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Good luck.